as the cold winds howled outside and the snow-covered landscape seemed to stretch on endlessly. Our team of dedicated Soviet researchers embarked on a journey into the unknown. The year was 1945, a time of secrecy and uncertainty, and we were tasked with a mission that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Within the confines of our isolated research facility, we had gathered a group of political prisoners who were deemed expendable by the authorities. The setting was grim, the facility a stark contrast to the white expanse that surrounded us. The concrete walls held an air of coldness that seemed to seep into the very marrow of our bones, a physical manifestation of the darkness that lay ahead. Our objective was to investigate the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human mind and body. The political climate of the time had granted us the autonomy to conduct experiments that would have been considered unthinkable in any other circumstance. The prisoners condemned to death or worse were offered a chance at survival in exchange for their participation. Little did they know the horrors that awaited them. The facility was equipped with observation rooms where we had installed dim lighting and minimal furnishings. The prisoners were housed in individual cells with reinforced glass windows, allowing us to monitor their behavior without direct physical interaction. Each cell contained a cot, a toilet, and a small sink, offering the barest essentials for survival. The first day of the experiment began with the induction of the prisoners into their respective cells. Their faces held a mixture of fear and resignation, their eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. As the steel doors clanged shut, a heavy silence settled over the facility, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional muffled conversation among the research team. I, Dr. Ivanov, took it upon myself to maintain detailed journal entries of the experiment's progress. It was my duty to record every observation, every reaction, and every nuance of behavior displayed by our subjects. The entries were meant to capture the essence of the experiment, to document the gradual deterioration of their physical and mental states. Day 1. The prisoners exhibited a range of emotions, from anxiety to anger, as they adjusted to their new surroundings. Some paced their cells restlessly while others lay on their cots, their eyes fixed on the ceiling as if lost in their thoughts. As the hours passed, their energy levels waned, and their initial apprehension gave way to the monotony of confinement. By evening, most of the subjects had attempted to engage in conversation with one another. Their voices hushed as they exchanged whispered words through the glass. It was clear that the isolation was already taking its toll, as they sought comfort in the company of their fellow captives. As the second day of the experiment dawned, the atmosphere within the facility had taken on an eerie quality. The prisoners' faces were etched with fatigue, their eyes heavy with sleeplessness. The lack of rest had begun to cast a pallor over their skin, giving them a hollowed appearance that seemed to mirror the emptiness of their cells. Day 2. The initial camaraderie among the subjects had given way to a tense silence. Conversations had grown sparse, replaced by a near-constant low murmur that echoed through the corridor. Some prisoners sat on their cots, staring blankly at the walls, their minds seemingly lost in a fog of exhaustion. By midday, the first signs of paranoia had begun to emerge. One of the prisoners, his eyes bloodshot and his voice quivering, claimed to hear distant whispers emanating from the walls. Others nodded in agreement, their gazes flickering towards the concrete as if searching for hidden truths within its texture. The lack of sleep had started to erode their cognitive functions. Simple tasks became monumental challenges, and their ability to hold coherent conversations waned. The subjects stumbled over their words, their sentences fragmented and disjointed as if their thoughts were being pulled apart by an invisible force. Day 3. The third day brought with it a descent into madness that was both alarming and surreal. The prisoners' behavior had become increasingly erratic, marked by bouts of frenzied activity followed by periods of listless apathy. Some clawed at the walls, their nails leaving marks on the concrete as if trying to escape the confines of their cells. The whispers that had once been faint had grown louder, their origins impossible to trace. The prisoners accused one another of plotting against them, their voices rising to a fevered pitch as they pointed fingers and accused each other of being traitors. Paranoia had taken root, feeding on their exhaustion and the uncertainty of their circumstances. By evening, a frenzy of violence erupted. One of the subjects, driven to the brink by his sleep-deprived state, attacked his cellmate with a ferocity that seemed to defy reason. The research team rushed to intervene, but the damage had already been done. Blood splattered the walls, a macabre reminder of the darkness that had enveloped their minds. As I penned my observations in my journal, I couldn't help but feel a chilling sense of unease. The experiment had taken a turn beyond our control. The boundaries of human endurance shattered by the very curiosity that had driven us to this point. The prisoners' minds had become battlegrounds of chaos and torment, their humanity stripped away by the relentless march of sleeplessness. As the third day of the experiment unfolded, the facility had transformed into a nightmarish tableau of suffering and despair. The prisoners, once bound by their shared torment, had become isolated islands of madness within their cells. Their eyes were bloodshot and wide, their bodies emaciated as the effects of sleep deprivation began to take their toll. Day 4. The passage of time had become a blur, the prisoners' perceptions warped by their fractured states of mind. Hallucinations had become a constant presence, their visions merging with the stark reality of their confinement. One subject claimed to see grotesque creatures lurking in the corners of his cell, while another spoke of voices that whispered secrets into his ears. The prisoners' behavior had become increasingly self-destructive. Some tore at their own flesh, their nails leaving trails of blood in their wake. Others banged their heads against the walls, a grotesque dance of agony and despair. It was as if the boundaries between their bodies and the world around them had dissolved, leaving them trapped in a waking nightmare. Day 5. By the 5th day, the prisoners' physical conditions had deteriorated to a point of no return. Their skin was pale and clammy, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. They had lost the ability to distinguish between reality and the phantoms that haunted their minds, their senses warped by the relentless assault of sleeplessness. Several of the subjects had fallen into a catatonic state, their eyes vacant and unresponsive. Their bodies had become husks, shells of their former selves, as if their souls had been drained away by the darkness that surrounded them. Others writhed on their cots, their limbs contorted in unnatural positions as they battled the demons that only they could see. As I documented their downward spiral in my journal, I felt a mixture of horror and guilt. The experiment had spiraled beyond our control, its boundaries shattered by the weight of our own curiosity. We had unleashed forces that were tearing at the very fabric of these individuals' minds, leaving them broken and shattered in their wake. Day 6. The 6th day brought with it a grim realization. The experiment had reached a point of no return. The prisoners' bodies had become frail and skeletal, their movements reduced to feeble twitches. Their eyes held a vacant emptiness, their gazes fixed on some distant horizon that only they could perceive. Communication among the subjects had all but ceased, replaced by the haunting sound of their labored breathing and the occasional whimper of pain. Their cells had become chambers of torment, their minds consumed by a relentless barrage of hallucinations and delusions. It was as if the boundaries between their innermost fears and the external world had dissolved, leaving them trapped in a nightmarish landscape of their own creation. And as I watched their suffering unfold, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of remorse. The pursuit of knowledge had led us down a path of cruelty and madness, leaving behind a trail of broken souls who had paid the price for our curiosity. The facility had become a graveyard of the human spirit, a place where the boundaries between life and death had become blurred by the horrors that lay within. As the days stretched on, the facility had become a realm of unspeakable suffering, a place where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had become indistinguishable. The prisoners' bodies were mere husks, their once vibrant forms reduced to a skeletal mockery of humanity. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a testament to the toll that sleep deprivation had exacted. Day 7. The 7th day brought with it a descent into a level of horror that defied all reason. The prisoners' minds had become fractured landscapes of torment, their psyches splintered by the relentless onslaught of hallucinations and paranoia. Some tore at their own flesh with a frenzied desperation, their nails leaving trails of blood as they sought to escape the invisible terrors that haunted them. The very fabric of their cells seemed to writhe and pulse, their surroundings morphing into grotesque forms that twisted and contorted with each blink of the eye. The boundaries between their bodies and the environment had dissolved entirely, leaving them trapped in a nightmarish void where the laws of reality held no sway. Day 8. By the 8th day, the prisoners' physical conditions had reached a point of utter degradation. Their bodies were covered in open sores and lesions, their skin marred by the self-inflicted wounds that had become a cruel ritual of desperation. The prisoners had lost the ability to speak coherently, their words a garbled mixture of delusion and madness. The sounds that echoed through the facility were a cacophony of torment. The eerie whispers that had once been faint had grown louder, their voices mingling with the prisoners' anguished cries. It was as if the very walls themselves were alive with malevolent energy, their vibrations feeding into the collective descent into madness. Day 9. As the 9th day dawned, the prisoners' bodies had become unrecognizable, their forms twisted and deformed by the horrors that had consumed them. Their eyes held a vacant emptiness, their movements reduced to involuntary spasms. The once bright light of their spirits had been extinguished, leaving behind only a hollow void of suffering. The research team could only watch in stunned horror as the experiment subjects continued their downward spiral. We had become passive observers to a symphony of agony, our pursuit of knowledge having led us to a point of no return. The very nature of our curiosity had shattered the lives of these individuals, leaving them trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. And as I continued to document their suffering in my journal, I was haunted by a sense of helplessness. The facility had become a crucible of torment, a place where the boundaries between life and death had been blurred by the very curiosity that had driven us to this point. The prisoners' minds had been consumed by a darkness that defied all reason, leaving them lost in a void of their own making. Day 10. The 10th day marked a turning point, a descent into a level of horror that transcended all reason. The subjects had been deprived of the sleep-inducing gas that had sustained them, plunging them into a waking nightmare that defied comprehension. The very essence of their minds had been shredded by the absence of rest, leaving behind only fragments of consciousness and delusion. The prisoners' behavior had become increasingly erratic, their movements marked by spasms and twitches. They clawed at their own flesh with a frenzied desperation, their nails leaving trails of blood as they sought to escape the invisible terrors that tormented them. The absence of sleep had transformed them into vessels of torment, their very existence a grotesque dance of agony. As the hours passed, the prisoners' interactions with one another grew increasingly violent. They fought for scraps of food and remnants of the sleep-inducing gas, their eyes wide with a primal hunger that seemed to transcend reason. The boundaries between self and other had dissolved entirely, leaving behind only a chaotic frenzy of survival instincts. Day 11. By the 11th day, the facility had descended into a realm of madness that was both horrifying and surreal. The prisoners had turned on one another, their minds consumed by a feverish frenzy for the elusive sleep-inducing gas. Their voices echoed through the corridors, a symphony of desperation and violence that reverberated through the very walls. The absence of the gas had unleashed a primal rage within the subjects, a hunger for relief that eclipsed all other instincts. They attacked one another with a brutality that was both shocking and appalling, their bodies twisted into contorted forms as they fought for control of the limited resources that remained. It was a spectacle of madness, a twisted dance of suffering that defied all reason. The first casualty occurred during a skirmish over a vial of the sleep-inducing gas. One of the prisoners, his eyes wild with desperation, lashed out with a makeshift weapon, striking his fellow inmate with a ferocity that seemed to transcend his physical limitations. The victim crumpled to the ground, his body twitching and convulsing as blood pooled around him. February 20th, 1945. On the 12th day of the experiment, the facility had become a crucible of torment, a place where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had been irrevocably shattered. The prisoners' bodies were twisted and broken, their minds consumed by a relentless barrage of delusions and madness. The very air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, a testament to the horrors that had taken root within the walls. Day 12. The 12th day marked a descent into a realm of darkness from which there was no escape. The absence of sleep-inducing gas had unleashed a frenzy of violence and despair that defied all comprehension. The prisoners, driven to the brink of insanity by the lack of rest, had turned on one another with a ferocity that transcended reason. The facility had become a battlefield, its corridors stained with blood and echoes of torment. The prisoners' bodies were contorted into grotesque forms, their movements marked by spasms and twitches. Some had taken to hiding in the shadows, their eyes wide with paranoia as they clung to the remnants of their sanity. Several more casualties had occurred, each marked by a sickening brutality that left a trail of death in its wake. The prisoners' addiction to the sleep-inducing gas had driven them to acts of unspeakable violence, their minds consumed by a hunger for relief that eclipsed all other instincts. The boundaries between self and other had dissolved entirely, leaving behind only a chaotic frenzy of survival instincts. The research team had been faced with a grim reality. The experiment had spiraled beyond our control, its boundaries shattered by the relentless onslaught of madness. It was clear that we could no longer justify the suffering that had been inflicted upon the subjects, that our pursuit of knowledge had come at a horrifying cost. Despite our best efforts to intervene, the prisoners resisted our attempts to end the experiment. They clung to the remnants of the sleep-inducing gas with a desperation that defied reason, their addiction driving them to lash out at anyone who threatened their access to the elusive relief they sought. As the echoes of violence reverberated through the facility, we knew that the experiment had reached a point of no return. The prisoners' minds had been consumed by a darkness that defied all comprehension, their humanity reduced to a primal instinct for survival. The boundaries between life and death had become blurred by the relentless march of madness, and we were powerless to halt its advance. And as the facility fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional whimper and the distant echoes of violence, I realized that our pursuit of understanding had come at a price too high to bear. The boundaries between morality and cruelty had been obliterated, leaving behind only a chamber of horrors from which there was no escape. As I stand at the precipice of the abyss, gazing into the darkness that has consumed us, I am overwhelmed by a sense of profound regret. The pursuit of knowledge, driven by a curiosity that knew no bounds, has led us down a path of cruelty and despair. The consequences of our actions are a burden too heavy to bear, a weight that has etched itself into the very fabric of my soul. In the aftermath of the experiment, I am haunted by intrusive thoughts that pierce through my thoughts like shards of glass. The images of the prisoners, their bodies contorted and broken, their minds lost in a waking nightmare, sear themselves into my mind. Their cries for another dose of the sleep-inducing gas echo through the chambers of my consciousness, a chorus of suffering that refuses to be silenced. I see their eyes, empty, deranged, consumed by a darkness that I helped to unleash. The boundaries between humanity and savagery have been obliterated, leaving behind only a chilling reminder of the horrors that can be unleashed by our insatiable curiosity. I am tormented by the knowledge that I played a part in this descent into madness, that my actions have irreparably shattered lives that can never be made whole again. Sleep eludes me, its embrace forever tainted by the images of those who suffered at our hands. The faces of the prisoners, twisted by the relentless onslaught of sleep deprivation, haunt my dreams, leaving me in a perpetual state of wakefulness. Their cries reverberate through the stillness of the night, a reminder of the darkness that I have become complicit in. I thought that I was advancing the boundaries of human understanding, that my actions were in service of a greater good. But now, as I stand in the aftermath of our folly, I realize the depths to which we have fallen. The pursuit of knowledge has exacted a price too high to bear, leaving behind a legacy of suffering and torment that will forever stain our collective conscience. I cannot take it anymore. The weight of my actions, the cries of the prisoners, the haunting gaze of those empty eyes, they have become too much to bear. The abyss that we descended into has consumed us, leaving behind only the remnants of our humanity. The boundaries between morality and cruelty, between understanding and madness, have blurred beyond recognition. As I lay down my pen and contemplate the consequences of our actions, I am left with a profound sense of despair. The experiment may be over, but its horrors will continue to reverberate through time, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. And as I close my eyes, I am haunted by the knowledge that I can never escape the abyss that I helped to create.